Please be seated. So I want to take this time. Like I said before, Pastor David is on vacation, but we do have another Pastor David coming to preach for us today. This is Pastor David Yoon. He is currently serving as our welcoming pastor here at KCQ. He is married and has a child, Taehun? Teo. Yeah, Teo. Sorry, my Korean is terrible. But yeah, he immigrated to Florida and then has come to New York where he has studied, and he's currently attending Southern Baptist Theological Seminary now and has been since 2022. And he is here now to bless us with his message. So please, let's welcome Pastor Davy Ahn.
Good morning. Thanks for the introduction. Another David. My actual Korean name is Donghyun, but since not many people can really pronounce that here, it's an unofficial name, David. I go by David in my workplace. I just found that it has more sad reality. Like when I find my job, I currently working in the data company, and when I try to find my job, no one really reached me out when I use the name Donghyun, but when I use the name David, I got more responses. So that's how I got this name David. I moved to States when I was 16, so obviously my English is not perfect, so please bear with me for next 30 minutes. Really excited to be here. I've seen the great things that the EM does in our church. So really excited to be here and share the message of God. We are continuing the series of Dear Church, from our Pastor Davy. And over the past few weeks, right, we've been journeying through the letter of James. If you remember, James isn't shy, right? He's direct, writing to the early believers, that challenging them on what it really means to follow Jesus, right? He talks about what it looks like to live out authentic faith, right? Reminding them and also reminding us that faith isn't just a belief in our heads, but something that shows up in our actions. Right, he's called them to be the doers of the word, to tame their tongue, and to treat each other without favoritism, and to live it a wisdom that comes from above. And now, as we come to the chapter 5, which is the end of this letter, James talk about something we all might struggle with, which is waiting, or patience, or endurance. Right, James understand that these believers are struggling. James writes this to Jewish Christians who scatter around throughout the nations. And these believers were trying to live out their faith in Jesus while navigating this complex social and economic challenges. Right, some were wealthy, others were poor, and some face exploitation. From the landowners who withheld wages, as we saw on our passage today from verse 1 to 6, and while others struggle with showing favoritism to the wealthy people. And midst of all of this, right, these believers were also eagerly waiting for the return of Jesus Christ, which they believe would bring justice and set everything right. Right, so day after day, they faced oppression, right? Day after day, they wondered how long. And to this frustrated believers, James says, be patient in verse 7, but not as an empty, hanging there, or casual. Hey, just be patient, right? But as someone who knows what they are going through. I don't know about you, but patience isn't something that comes naturally to me. Especially in a word that taught me to expect everything now, right? If you really think about it, when was the When was the last time we actually waited for something? Right? We have same day delivery. We have like on demand streaming, like instant everything, right? And we get frustrated, like if the microwave takes more than 2 minutes, right? I like since I have a baby, his name is Theo. He's like 8 months. I prepare a lot of baby formula, and I have to use the microwave a lot. And what I found myself doing is, when I put like a minute or so for the microwave, and the number counts down, 30, 28, 29, 28, um, and at 10 seconds, I just can't take it anymore and just, take out the food, grab my food. Apparently, like waiting those 10 seconds, might be too much for me. So that's the world we live in. This waiting is really hard. Being patient is really hard. But the thing is, God doesn't work on our instant timeline, right? He's not a microwave God. It's more like a slow cooker, right? And I know that can be frustrating at some times. But here's what I've learned today from the passage, that waiting isn't a wasted time. Right? Waiting isn't wasted time. In fact, in the Bible, waiting is often where God does his best work. And our passage today, James 5, gives us this powerful picture that it's not just about waiting, but it's also about a sacred waiting. Waiting with purpose, waiting with trust, waiting in a way that shapes us and prepares us for what God is doing. So today I want us to lean into this idea of sacred waiting and ask, how can you wait well? How can you wait well when God says, not yet? And as we look at our passage today, we'll discover 3 essential aspects of sacred waiting that can transform how we wait upon the Lord. The first aspect is wait with the right understanding, right? So let's start with James's first example, the farmer. If you go to verse 7, he says, "Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until he receives the early and the late rains." Now, I'm not a farmer. I didn't grow up on a farm, but actually my father-in-law and my brother-in-law are farmers in Korea. My father-in-law is a pastor in Korea, but he also since he serves in this countryside in Korea, ministering in church doesn't give a full option to live out. So he has to do the farming. He farmed tomatoes. He also farmed deers, different stuff. And my also brother-in-law, he's also a professional farmer. He went to college for this farming and is studying like planting and I don't know what's the term in here, but like mountain related stuff. But so whenever I go to Korea, I know I sometimes help them. Right? They have their own this farming lands, and it is so hard, right? What I'm doing here is I'm just sitting at the desk, typing the keyboards. But when I go to Korea, helping them, farming, it's really, really hard. It's really physically, demanding. And the hardest part for me is that I'm kind of person who wants to see the results right away, right? But farming isn't like that. It takes lots and lots of time to see the plant grows, and give the fruit. So farming takes patience, right? So the farmer understands something crucial about waiting that we often miss in our world, right? Farmer knows that they can rush the harvest, right? I want to do this. I want to, pull on the plants and see how it does. But you can't really pull on the plants to make them grow faster, right? You can really demand the rain, or you can demand the sun, or you can demand the rain to fall sooner, right? That's That's a natural process that can be hurried. If you imagine a first century farmer, like in our passage today, uh, one thing I didn't know is that they would plant in fall and wait for the early rains to germinate the seeds, and then wait through the winter, hope for the spring rains, and finally harvest in the late spring or early summer. Right, so that's like uh, at least 6 months to 8 months of waiting. That's a month of waiting, right? But the beautiful thing is that the waiting time isn't empty time, right? It's underground, invisible to the human eye. But farmers know that this crucial development is happening, underground, invisible to our eyes, right? Another interesting about farmers waiting is that it's not about being free from worry, right? Every farmer knows that there could be multiple risks. There could be a droughts, there could be floods, there could be pest. There's so many things beyond their control, but still they plant. Still they wake up early and work. Still they wait. Why is that? Because they trust something deeper than this worries, than this risk. That they trust the rhythm of a seasons that God put in place, right? Spring comes, summer comes. They never fail to come. So their confidence isn't about in this perfect conditions, but it's in the God's faithfulness to bring the seasons. And that's why it says James, that's how James reminds us that Lord's coming is near. Just like the farmer who plants despite the risk, despite the uncertainties, we can be confident that God will fulfill His promise. And I think this changes how we wait, right? Not because we are free from worries, not because we are, knows that everything will be okay, but because we trust someone bigger than our worries. Like just as farmer keeps working, tending the fields, preparing for harvest, we can use our waiting time purposefully. And this kind of waiting gives us like different perspective. Instead of just asking, why isn't it happening yet, Lord? Can you just solve the problem quicker, right now? But rather we can ask, what is God doing in this waiting time? Right? Even when we can't control the outcome, we can trust the one who controls all seasons. So the waiting isn't wasted. It's a sacred time, and God is shaping you in ways that you may not even realize. Now, if you go to the next verse, in verse 9, if waiting is so important, why does James suddenly start talking about relationships, right? Because he knows something, crucial about waiting. Waiting isn't just about, testing our faith, but it could be mean that it's also related to our community, right? If you go to verse 9, James writes, do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. Right? Waiting is hard. We all know that. Waiting is hard. And waiting when you're under stress is even harder. Right? And that what happens when waiting gets hard? We get sad, we get frustrated, right? We get impatient, we get angry. And where does all that frustration go? It sometimes spills out onto the people around us. It spills out onto our family, spills out onto our friends. So we look for someone sometimes to blame, sometimes to lash it out. Look for someone to complain about it. Because somehow we think it'll make waiting easier. Somehow we think it'll make us feel better. But does it really? I think the answer is pretty clear that hurting others or grumbling others never makes the waiting easier. And James knows this. That's why he urges a different posture. James reminds us that even in the waiting, God remains the judge at the door. Like what does it that mean? That judge at the door. If you go to verse 9, it means that God sees how we wait. Right? He's being the judge at the door and sees how we wait. It means that God sees how we treat each other while we wait. Right? It means that God sees our attitudes, our words, our actions during the waiting, during this hard time. And this isn't a meant to be threat to scare us into to good behavior, but rather it's a reminder that waiting isn't just about reaching the destination. Waiting isn't just about reaching the destination. Waiting isn't just about waiting the rain, waiting the sun to come, but it's more about who we become along the way. And if Jesus is coming back, and he's coming back, then how we treat each other matters, right? How we speak to each other matters. How we support each other matters, right? We don't have to tear each other down in the community. That's why James says, do not grumble against us. And instead we can lift each other up. We can encourage each other. We can wait together. That's the point of James is sending us right here. And if you really think about what happened in Old Testament to the Israelites, waiting in the wilderness, right? They waited for 40 years. 40 years. That's a long time to wait, right? And what happened during the wait, right? They started complaining about the food, about the water, about their shelter, about Moses, about Aaron, about everything, right? That complaining spread like a disease, like through the camp, and soon everyone was grumbling, and led it to division, rebellion, sometimes violence. This one small impatience infected another until an entire community was torn apart by bitterness. And I think this story shows how easily waiting can tear a community apart. But at the same time, it also makes the beauty of this early church, even more remarkable. We all know that, from the Acts, how in the early church faced the season of waiting, right? When persecution came, instead of tearing each other, they drew closer together and they shared everything they had. They supported each other's needs. They worshipped together. They broke bread in each other's homes. And when Peter was in prison, the church gathered to pray through the night for him. Right? Even Paul's church, scattered around across the different cities, they collected offerings to help church in famine and sent letters of encouragement. And this kind of genuine community is becoming, increasingly rare in these days. People are more isolated than ever. Right? Many have been hurt by communities in the past, so they keep their distance. They try to protect themselves by staying alone. And yes, sometimes that feels safer. But what they're missing is this incredible gift of a true Christian community, right? When you experience this real fellowship, when people genuinely support each other, when they, point each other to God, where they carry each other's burdens. I think that's something that word can't replicate. That's the unique power of the church, right? When you wait together, encourage together, hope together. We show that the word, something, they desperately need but can rarely find, this communion in the church. And I think that's the beauty of being the God's people. And this is what James is calling us to protect and to nurture, right? So that was a second point of wait with the right attitude. And third, the last point is, while if you go to verse 10 to 12, is the wait with the right examples. So James doesn't just tell us what to do, be patient, do not grumble. He also shows us how, by pointing us to that who already walked this path before. Right, if you go to verse 10, as an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job. You have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. Right, at first glance, it sounds like just another instruction from the James, right? But I think these examples can, land differently depending on where our hearts are. When you're barely holding on, I think these stories become more than a stories, right? They become a lifeline. They become your strength. These prophets, who waited years, who waited decades, who waited centuries, actually, for some of them, for the promised outcomes. And then also Job, who held on to the faith in his darkest hour. They are actually speaking to us, in that they are speaking to us that, you are not alone, we are not alone. They are saying that God sees you. They are saying to hold on. Because the same God who was faithful to them is faithful to you. And every prophet who waited and every trial that Job faced tells us the same truth, that God's people have always walked this path, and God has always proven faithful in the end. And I think sometimes the same story of prophets and same story of Job, sometimes it hit us differently, right? When you're doing okay, when the things are going, stable, when you think that we got things under control, you might hear about the prophets and Job and think that, oh, that's nice, but my situation is different, right? And I think that's a natural, very a human response, right? We all have this moment that we can handle things on our own. But the beautiful thing that James shows us, that teaches us here, is that he's not sharing these examples to make us feel bad or to give us this spiritual lecture. I think he's rather showing us that the faith has always been a journey of trust, right? Because the prophets weren't perfect. The Job wasn't perfect. They were the real people like us who struggled, who had a hard time to wait, who questioned, right? Who asked God, who wrestled with God, who wrestled with waiting, just like us. So the stories remind us of something bigger than ourselves. When the prophets waited, right? They weren't just waiting for their own sake. They were part of God's bigger story. We all see that in the Bible, right? And when Job endured, when Job was being patient, he probably couldn't see how his faithfulness would encourage millions and millions of people throughout the centuries coming today, reading his story, right? I think this shows us that our waiting isn't just about us either. It isn't just about, our life being better, our life being stable, right? If you really believe in the story of God, of Bible and the Word of God, waiting isn't just about us, but it's also saying that we are part of the same story, that God's faithfulness, just like prophets or just like Job. So this ancient examples, this example from Bible become, I think, fresh again when we receive them with the wide open hearts, right? They aren't just the distant figures from ancient stories, but they are fellow believers. If you really think, they are fellow believers who walked this path, this waiting, this challenging before us, showing us what it looks like to trust God. And their stories remind us that our waiting isn't meaningless. Our waiting isn't just that everybody experience, right? It's the part of this greater story of God, of God's faithfulness to His people. And as we walk through our passage from chapter 5 in James today, right? We've seen that waiting isn't just about passively waiting, passive stretch of time to be endured. It's rather more of sacred space where God is shaping us, where God is testing our trust, where God is refining our hope. And we learn that to wait with the right understanding, like a farmer trusting the seasons, looking forward to the ultimate harvest of the Lord's return. We also learn to wait with the right attitude, refusing to, tearing our brothers and sisters sitting next to us, but instead choosing patience and empathy, because we know that God who will bring justice is watching how we treat one another, right? And when you look at the right examples from the prophets and Job, right, this giant of faith, who remind us that countless others have walked this road before us and found God faithful. If you really think about all of this, right, waiting is never wasted, right? Jesus also waited, right, when he was doing his ministry for 33 years. He would probably know that the end of his life, right, being crucified in the cross, right? If you really think about how he would wait, knowing the end, knowing the lowest death on the cross, I think that really tells us something, right? Since it's the Advent where we are waiting for the coming of Jesus, I think if you really see why Jesus, died on the cross, and why he came to earth, and why he come to this village of, is it Galilee in English? Galilee, right? If you really think about it, right? Dying on the cross is so how to say, is so terrible that if you look at the Roman records at the time, it's so horrible that Romans didn't punish the criminals in the cross, because it's just so cruel, right? But if you really think about it, Jesus could have died just as in other ways of dying. I don't know the ways of dying in English, but there are different ways of dying, right? Other than cross. He also came to the village of Galilee, right? Galilee is, if you really think about in our terms today, it's at the very bottom of our socioeconomic status, right? People are poor. There are a village, there are town of this people with the skin disease. And he shared food, he slept there, he hung out with the people there. So all the thing, right? He experienced the lowest possible, the rock bottom experience that any human can experience, right? He already went through all of it. And even at the dying, he died at the cross, the most cruel, way of dying. I think this tells us something that if you really think about why he done that, right? We all know because we trust in gospel, we know why, right? Because of our sins to save us. But if you really think about, if you really focus on the suffering part, if you think about the waiting part, why he done that, why he died on cross, why he come to the Galilee, why he come into the earth, I think that tells us something, that he understands our pain. He understands our waiting. He understands how hard the life is. He understands how hard the death could be, because he experienced the lowest form of living in the earth that any human could experience, right? So the point is, waiting is never wasted, and God and Jesus understand that. He also waits. He also endured. He also suffered through the waiting. So brothers and sisters, may we embrace this sacred waiting with open hearts, confident in God's perfect timing, and encouraged by these faithful examples before us, right? And committed to treating one another with patience and grace. Let's pray.